Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. I had been fixated on the outline of the door frame across the dim room. The curtains swayed gently, though the air was still, and the tick of the clock grew louder, asserting itself into the silence. The light from the street lamp outside cast patterns on the wall, shifting with each passing car, leaving faint impressions that didn't quite fade. My breath felt measured, as if synchronized with the rhythmic thud of my heart. Then, in the midst of this careful observation, the clock's tick stuttered, a single beat missed, and the familiar felt suddenly out of place. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, though I couldn't remember making any. The mug sat on the table beside me, half empty, the liquid cold against my fingertip when I tested it. Steam had long since stopped rising from its surface, yet the smell persisted, bitter and somehow wrong, as if it belonged to someone else's morning routine. I stood, my joints protesting the movement, and walked toward the kitchen. The floorboards beneath my feet gave their usual complaints, but the sequence felt off. The third board from the doorway, the one that always groaned when stepped on, remained silent. I pressed my weight down deliberately, testing it. Nothing. The absence of that familiar sound created a hollow space in my chest. The kitchen held its own mysteries. A glass sat in the sink, lipstick traces around its rim in a shade I'd never worn. The color was deep, almost burgundy, applied with the confidence of someone who knew they belonged here. I lifted the glass, turning it in the light filtering through the small window above the sink. The mark was fresh enough that it hadn't yet dried completely. My reflection caught in the window's surface, superimposed over the view of the backyard. The woman staring back appeared tired, her hair disheveled in a way that suggested restless sleep rather than recent awakening. Behind her reflection, movement in the yard drew my attention. A figure stood near the garden shed, partially obscured by the old oak tree. The person seemed to be waiting, their posture suggesting familiarity with the space. I moved closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass slightly. When I wiped it clear, the figure was gone. Only the shed remained, its door slightly ajar in a way I didn't remember leaving it. The metal latch hung loose, swaying almost imperceptibly in what must have been a breeze I couldn't feel from inside. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the morning quiet. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice emerging hoarser than expected. "You sound tired," the caller said. The voice was familiar yet difficult to place, like a song heard through water. "I'm fine," I replied, though the words felt rehearsed, as if I'd given this same response many times before. "We need to talk about what happened, about what you remember." The line went quiet except for the subtle hum of connection. I found myself nodding, though the caller couldn't see me, as if my body understood something my mind hadn't yet grasped. "The coffee shop," the voice continued. "Can you meet me there?" I agreed without thinking, the words leaving my mouth before I could consider their implications. After hanging up, I stared at the phone, trying to recall the caller's identity. The voice had carried an undertone of urgency masked as casual conversation, the kind of careful neutrality that suggested practiced deception. The drive across town passed in fragments. I remember the sensation of my hands gripping the steering wheel, the vinyl warm despite the morning chill. Traffic lights changed from red to green with mechanical precision, but I couldn't recall stopping or starting. The radio played soft jazz, though I didn't remember turning it on. The music felt intrusive, as if someone else had preset the station for their own comfort. The coffee shop occupied a corner building with large windows that should have invited natural light, but somehow seemed to absorb it instead. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the mingled scents of roasted beans and something sweeter, almost medicinal. I chose a table near the back, facing the entrance, though I wasn't sure why this positioning felt necessary. The woman who approached my table moved with deliberate casualness, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was younger than her voice had suggested over the phone, with auburn hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her hands remained visible on the table, fingers interlaced in a gesture that seemed both nervous and controlled. "I'm not sure why I'm here," I admitted. "Because you want to understand what happened that night, what really happened." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small recording device, placing it between us on the scarred wooden table. The red light blinked steadily, an electronic heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with my own pulse. "You called the police," she said. "Do you remember that?" I did, though the memory felt borrowed, as if it belonged to someone who resembled me but wasn't quite the same person. I remembered the weight of the phone in my hand, the way my voice had sounded strange and distant as I spoke to the dispatcher, but the details of what I'd reported remained frustratingly vague. "There was blood," I said, the words emerging without conscious decision. "Where?" "On the bathroom floor, just a few drops, but they were still wet." She nodded, making a note in a small pad she'd produced from her jacket pocket. Her pen moved across the paper with quick, efficient strokes, capturing information I wasn't sure I'd actually provided. "And the person you saw leaving the building, can you describe them?" The question triggered a cascade of contradictory images. A tall figure in dark clothing, a woman with blonde hair, someone walking quickly but not quite running, a face turned away at the crucial moment when recognition might have been possible. Each detail felt equally true and equally false. "I'm not certain I saw anyone," I said finally. "But you told the police you did." "Did I?" She replayed a portion of the recording. My own voice filled the small space between us, describing events I couldn't quite remember experiencing. The woman on the tape sounded confident, providing specific details about timing and physical descriptions. She spoke with the authority of an eyewitness, someone who had observed everything clearly and retained it accurately. "That's not how I remember it," I said when the recording stopped. Memory can be unreliable, especially after trauma. Sometimes our minds protect us by altering details that might be too difficult to process. Her explanation sounded reasonable, but something in her tone suggested she was reading from a script, delivering information she'd provided to others in similar circumstances. The recording device continued its steady blinking, documenting our conversation with mechanical indifference. "What happened to the person who lived there?" I asked. "That's what we're trying to determine." The apartment was empty when police arrived. No signs of struggle, no indication of violence beyond what you reported seeing. "But the blood was gone by the time the investigation began. The bathroom had been cleaned thoroughly. Professional-grade cleaning supplies, the kind used by specialized services. The implications of this information settled slowly, like sediment in still water. Someone had been in that apartment between my initial observation and the police arrival. someone with access, knowledge, and the resources to eliminate evidence quickly and completely. How long between my call and their arrival? I asked. She consulted her notes, though I suspected she already knew the answer. 47 minutes. There was a multi-vehicle accident across town that delayed response time. 47 minutes, enough time to remove evidence, clean surfaces, perhaps even move a body if necessary. The thought arrived fully formed, as if it had been waiting in my subconscious for acknowledgement. "You think I'm lying," I said. "I think you're trying to remember something that may have been deliberately obscured. Sometimes witnesses see things that certain people prefer remain unobserved." The coffee shop around us continued its normal operations. Customers ordered drinks, baristas operated machinery, conversations flowed in the comfortable anonymity of public space. Yet our table felt isolated, surrounded by an invisible barrier that separated our discussion from the mundane activities occurring mere feet away. "The person who lived in that apartment," I said, "what can you tell me about them?" "Quiet, kept regular hours, worked from home doing freelance graphic design. No known enemies, no obvious involvement in anything that might attract violence." Might attract violence, but something did. Perhaps what you witnessed was something else entirely. A medical emergency, an accident, something that appeared more sinister than it actually was. Her suggestion felt like a lifeline, an explanation that would allow me to return to normal life without the weight of unanswered questions. But accepting it would require ignoring the growing certainty that what I'd observed had been neither accident nor medical emergency. "Declining," I said. "Medical emergencies don't require professional-grade evidence removal. Unless the person involved had reasons to avoid official attention. Immigration status, outstanding warrants, involvement in activities that might not withstand scrutiny." Again, her explanation sounded plausible, but the pattern was becoming clear. Every question I raised was met with reasonable alternatives that would minimize the significance of what I'd witnessed. She was guiding me toward a conclusion that would close the matter without further investigation. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Clarity, the truth about what you actually saw versus what you might have assumed or inferred." "And if I can't provide that clarity?" "Then we close the file as a false alarm. No crime occurred, no further investigation is warranted." The recording device continued its steady documentation. I wondered who would eventually listen to this conversation, what conclusions they might draw from the careful dance we were performing around the central questions neither of us seemed willing to address directly. "I'd like to see the apartment," I said. "That's not possible. The building has been sold, the unit renovated. Any physical evidence that might have existed has been eliminated through normal renovation processes." "How convenient." "Not convenient, simply the reality of how these situations unfold. Time passes, life continues, physical spaces are repurposed." I stood, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in our small bubble of conversation. The recording device's red light continued blinking, indifferent to my movement. "Will you be closing the file?" I asked. "That depends on whether you have anything else to add to your statement." "And if I do?" "Then we'll investigate further." But her tone suggested that further investigation was not the outcome she preferred. I was being offered a choice: accept the comfortable uncertainty of unanswered questions or pursue truth that might lead to complications no one wanted to navigate. The drive home passed more clearly than the morning journey, as if the conversation had sharpened my perception while simultaneously deepening the mystery. The familiar streets looked different, more detailed yet somehow less real, like a movie set designed to represent normal life rather than the actual thing. My house welcomed me with its usual collection of small imperfections: the loose doorknob that required precise manipulation to turn properly, the light switch in the hallway that had to be pressed firmly to make connection, the floorboard that announced visitors with its distinctive groan. But the coffee mug still sat on the table where I'd left it, and the glass with lipstick traces remained in the sink. Physical evidence of events I couldn't quite integrate into a coherent narrative of my own experience. I sat in the chair where I'd begun the morning, looking again at the doorframe that had first captured my attention. The light had shifted with the sun's movement, creating different patterns on the wall, but the basic geometry remained constant. Solid wood painted white, showing the accumulated wear of years of use. Nothing mysterious or threatening about it, yet it continued to hold my attention as if it contained information I needed but couldn't access. The phone rang again. This time I recognized the voice immediately, though I still couldn't attach a name to it. "How did the meeting go?" the caller asked. "She wants me to forget what I saw." "And will you?" The question hung in the air between us, carrying implications that extended far beyond the simple choice it seemed to represent. Forgetting would restore the comfortable routine of normal life. Remembering would require confronting possibilities that might prove more disturbing than the questions they resolved. "I don't think I can forget," I said finally. "Then you'll need to be very careful about how you remember." The line went quiet, leaving me alone with the steady tick of the clock that had started this strange morning. But now the rhythm seemed different, less mechanical and more organic, as if it were keeping time with something other than the simple passage of moments. Outside, the street lamp flickered on despite the afternoon light still filtering through the windows. The premature illumination cast familiar patterns on the wall, but they appeared somehow reversed, as if I were seeing them from a different angle or through different eyes. I closed my own eyes and tried to reconstruct the sequence of events that had brought me to this point. The blood on the bathroom floor, the figure leaving the building, the phone call to police, but each memory felt negotiable, subject to revision based on new information or different interpretation. Perhaps that was the real crime, not whatever had happened in that apartment, but the systematic erosion of certainty that had followed. The careful manipulation of perception and memory until truth became a matter of perspective rather than fact. The recording device had captured our conversation, but recordings could be edited, context could be removed, emphasis could be shifted to support whatever conclusion seemed most convenient. Even my own memories were proving unreliable, subject to influence by suggestion and the simple passage of time. I opened my eyes and looked again at the doorframe. It remained exactly as it had been, solid and unchanging, the one constant in a morning that had transformed everything else into questions. But now I wondered if my fixation on it had been deliberate, a way of anchoring myself to something concrete while everything else shifted and blurred. The clock continued its steady rhythm, no longer stuttering as it had in those first moments of awareness. Whatever had caused that brief interruption in its mechanical precision had passed, leaving only the memory of a moment when the familiar had revealed itself as something else entirely. And in that memory I found the only truth I could trust, the certainty that nothing was quite as it appeared, and that some questions were more dangerous than the answers they might reveal. Story 2. It wasn't unusual for the attic door to creak open in the night. Occasionally, a breeze from the open window would unsettle the dust on the floor, but the prints always remained the same. I adjusted the curtains this morning, noting how the light filtered through differently. The clock in the hall had stopped, but I left it unwound. The smell of coffee lingered, an echo of a routine I no longer observed. Yet nothing seemed amiss, not in a way that mattered. By noon, the door was shut again. I didn't bother checking the lock. The footprints in the dust, that's what I keep coming back to. Small ones like a child's, but the pattern wrong somehow. Too deliberate, too careful. I remember measuring my own foot against them once, but the memory feels borrowed, like something I watched happen to someone else. There was a conversation, I'm almost certain. Voices drifting down from above while I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. The words scattered before I could catch them, leaving only the cadence, the rhythm of questions and answers that didn't quite match. Did you check? That fragment surfaces sometimes. A woman's voice, familiar but distant, my own maybe, or hers. The distinction blurs when I try to focus on it. The house holds its breath during those quiet hours between afternoon and evening. That's when the settling sounds most like footsteps, when the shadows arrange themselves into shapes that suggest presence. I've learned not to look too quickly toward the staircase. Movement in my peripheral vision feels safer, less confrontational. I found something once, a piece of paper, folded small and tucked behind the loose baseboard near the window. The ink had faded, but I could make out fragments of handwriting. Lists maybe, or instructions. The paper crumbled when I tried to unfold it completely, leaving only partial words that meant nothing by themselves. The smell of coffee doesn't belong here anymore. I stopped making it months ago, or was it longer? Time moves strangely in this space, folding back on itself. But the aroma persists, strongest near the attic stairs, as if someone else maintains the ritual I abandoned. She used to climb those stairs every morning, I remember that much. The sound of her footsteps, lighter than mine, more purposeful. She had a reason for going up there, something she never explained. When I asked, she'd pause with her hand on the banister, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Just checking, she'd say, always the same words, always that slight hesitation before answering. The prints in the dust tell a story I can't quite piece together. They appear overnight fresh impressions in the layer of fine particles that accumulates despite my efforts to clean. Small feet, bare feet, moving in patterns that suggest searching, circling, looking for something specific. I dreamed about the attic again, or remembered dreaming about it. The distinction feels meaningless now. In the dream or memory or whatever it was, the space above seemed larger, stretching beyond the boundaries of the house itself. Boxes lined the walls, but when I tried to examine them, my hands passed through them like they were made of shadow. The conversation continues sometimes when I'm not paying attention. Whispered exchanges that stop the moment I focus on them. Questions about locks, about keys, about things that should stay hidden. My voice among them, agreeing to something I can't remember deciding. There's a photograph somewhere. I know this without knowing how I know it. A picture that would explain the footprints, the voices, the reason the attic door refuses to stay closed. but every time I think I'm close to finding it, the certainty dissolves, leaving only the impression of having lost something important. The light through the curtains creates patterns on the floor that shift throughout the day. Sometimes the shadows align with the footprints, as if the person who made them is still there, still moving through the space but invisible now, transparent, reduced to impressions in dust and creaking floorboards. I've started leaving the door open. It seems pointless to keep closing it when it opens itself anyway. The breeze from the window feels different now, less random, more intentional, like breath held too long and finally released. The clock in the hall stopped at a specific moment. I know this matters, but I can't remember why. The hands point to a time that feels significant, loaded with meaning I can't access. Sometimes I catch myself staring at it, waiting for it to resume ticking, but I never wind it. Some part of me understands that starting it again would be a mistake. She's in the photographs on the mantel, but her face seems different each time I look. Younger in some, older in others, as if time moved differently for her than it did for me. In one picture, she's looking toward the camera with an expression of concern or warning. Her mouth is slightly open, caught mid-word, trying to tell me something I'm not ready to hear. The coffee smell grows stronger when it rains. Water drumming against the roof awakens something in the house, stirring memories that have settled into the walls like sediment. I find myself climbing the stairs during these storms, drawn by sounds that might be rain or might be something else entirely. The attic feels smaller now than it did before. The ceiling seems lower, the walls closer together, but the footprints cover more ground than the space should allow, as if the room expands when I'm not there to observe its boundaries. Physics bends around whatever truth I'm avoiding. I remember her hands, small hands that matched the prints in the dust. She had a habit of touching things as she passed them, trailing her fingers along surfaces like she was reading them. The banister, the door frame, the edge of the table where we used to sit across from each other, not talking about the sounds from above. "Someone's up there," I said once. The words surface from wherever buried conversations go to hide. "I know," she replied, but her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying, more than I was ready to understand. The paper I found contained fragments of what might have been a letter or a confession. The visible words included sorry and couldn't and too late. The rest had faded beyond recognition, but the urgency in the handwriting was still clear. Someone had pressed hard with the pen, leaving indentations that outlasted the ink. The routine of checking the attic became automatic after a while. Every morning, every evening, sometimes in between when the house grew too quiet, I'd climb the stairs and stand in the doorway, scanning the familiar space for changes. The footprints were always there, always fresh, but nothing else seemed disturbed. She stopped climbing the stairs suddenly. I remember that transition, the way the house felt different without her daily pilgrimages to the space above. The silence became heavier, more expectant. The attic door began opening more frequently, as if compensating for her absence. The dust tells time differently than clocks do. It accumulates in layers, each one marking a period of stillness, of abandonment. But the footprints cut through all the layers, suggesting they're made continuously, regularly, by someone who doesn't respect the normal passage of time. I've started talking to the empty rooms, asking questions that hang in the air without answers. The house absorbs my words, adding them to whatever collection of sounds it keeps in its walls. Sometimes I hear echoes of conversations I don't remember having, my voice mixed with hers, discussing things that make no sense. The window in the attic faces a direction that should show the neighbor's house, but lately it seems to look out on nothing. empty space where familiar landmarks should be. The view changes depending on when I look, as if the house decides what I'm allowed to see. She left things behind, small objects that appear in places she never went, or at least places I never saw her go. A hair tie on the kitchen counter, a book marked with a page I don't remember reading, evidence of presence that contradicts absence. The footprints have begun appearing downstairs. Same size, same deliberate pattern, but now they trace paths through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway where the stopped clock marks time that no longer passes. The boundaries are expanding or breaking down. I found myself in the attic this morning without remembering the decision to climb the stairs. Standing among the boxes and shadows, looking down at the fresh prints in the dust, realizing that some of them were mine, but not all of them. Not the small ones that circle and search and seem to know exactly what they're looking for. The coffee smell has faded, replaced by something else. Something that reminds me of rain and dust and the particular silence that follows difficult conversations. The house is forgetting her presence, but slowly, reluctantly, like someone letting go of a secret they've kept too long. The photograph I've been looking for is probably in the attic, hidden among the boxes I've been avoiding, the ones that feel too heavy with memory to open. But the footprints circle those boxes nightly, wearing paths in the dust that suggest patient, persistent searching. She's still checking, that's what I'm beginning to understand, still climbing the stairs in ways that leave prints but no other trace. Still looking for whatever she was looking for when she lived here in a more conventional sense. The routine continues, but the rules have changed. The attic door creaks open in the night, just like it always has. But now I understand it's not the wind, it's not the house settling. It's her maintaining the vigil I never understood, checking on something I never thought to question. The clock in the hall marks the moment everything changed, the moment she became footprints in dust instead of footsteps on stairs. But I left it unwound because some changes shouldn't be measured in time that moves forward. The smell of coffee lingers because routines echo longer than the people who create them. The house remembers her morning ritual, her careful preparation, the way she'd pause with the mug in her hands before climbing the stairs to check on whatever needed checking. By noon, the door was shut again, but that doesn't mean she's gone. It just means she's learned to move through the house differently, leaving only the traces I'm finally learning to read. The footprints in the dust, small and deliberate in searching, always searching for something I'm not sure I want her to find. Story 3. The candle flickered as I closed the door. Its wavering light cast blurred shapes against the walls, unsettling in their fleeting clarity. My fingers brushed an unfamiliar grit on the table, invisible to the eye. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something I couldn't grasp. Outside, a whistle cut sharply through, though the melody was off-key. The unease lingered, a shadow in the back of my mind. I keep thinking about the way she held her coffee cup, both hands wrapped around it like she was warming herself, though the room wasn't cold. Her knuckles were pale, pressed tight against the ceramic. I should have asked why she was shaking. The photograph sits face down on my desk. I turned it over this morning, then flipped it back. Some things are easier to forget when you can't see them, but the edges are worn from handling, and I know every detail by heart. The way the light caught her hair, the shadow behind her that doesn't quite match the angle of the sun. There was sand in my car after that weekend. Fine grains worked into the floor mats, though I couldn't remember walking on any beach. I vacuumed twice, but it kept appearing, like the desert had followed me home. She always said I noticed too much, called it a gift and a curse in the same breath, laughing, but her eyes never joined in. I watched how she arranged things on her nightstand, the book's spine aligned with the table edge, the water glass exactly 3 fingers from the lamp, order imposed on a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The basement door was open when I came back. I'm certain I left it closed. The hinges don't move on their own, they're too stiff, require deliberate pressure. Someone had been in the house, or I'm losing pieces of myself, moments disappearing into gaps I can't explain. I found her journal wedged between couch cushions. The pages were filled with her careful handwriting, but the words made no sense. Lists of numbers, street intersections that don't exist, names I'd never heard her mention. She wrote about watching someone, following patterns, taking notes. The dates jump around, entries out of sequence, like she was trying to confuse anyone who might read it. The phone rang while I was reading. 3 short bursts, then silence, no one on the other end when I answered. This happened for weeks after she disappeared, always the same pattern. 3 rings, silence, the sound of breathing that might have been static. I drove past the motel where we stayed that summer. The neon sign was broken, letters missing, casting incomplete words into the darkness. The clerk remembered us, mentioned how she paid in cash, how she asked about the back exit, details I'd forgotten or never noticed. He said she seemed nervous, kept checking the parking lot. The police officer had tired eyes. She took notes while I spoke, but I could tell she'd heard similar stories before. Missing persons who might not want to be found. Adults who vanished by choice, leaving behind puzzles for those who loved them. She asked if we'd been fighting, if there were problems I hadn't mentioned. Her pen stopped moving when I hesitated. There's a key in my pocket I don't recognize. Small, silver, worn smooth at the edges. It appeared in my jacket after I went through her things. I've tried it in every lock I can think of. Her car, her office, the storage unit she rented. Nothing fits, but I keep carrying it, turning it over in my palm when I'm not thinking. The library has records of books she checked out. Titles about disappearing, changing identity, starting over. True crime stories about people who walked away from their lives. She read them methodically, one after another, like she was studying for something. The librarian remembered her because she always asked about the return policy, whether there were ways to avoid late fees if you couldn't come back. I smell her perfume sometimes in rooms she never visited, faint traces that vanish when I try to follow them. The scent leads me through the house, down hallways, into corners where dust has gathered. I wonder if memory has its own geography, mapping presence onto absence. The credit card statements showed purchases I couldn't explain, gas stations in towns I'd never heard of, a camping supply store, cash advances from banks across 3 states. She was planning something, creating a trail that led away from everything we'd built together. The amounts were small, careful, spread across months. Her sister called asking questions I couldn't answer. When had she seemed different, whether she'd mentioned feeling unsafe. Family gatherings where she'd been quiet, distracted, checking her phone. We compared notes like detectives working a case, but every clue led to more questions. She'd been careful about what she shared, even with blood. The storage unit was empty when I finally found it. Clean concrete walls, no sign anything had ever been kept there. But the rental agreement was in her name, paid through the end of the year. The manager said she'd cleaned it out herself, took everything in one trip. He helped her load boxes into a truck he didn't recognize. I keep finding things she left behind, not accidentally, deliberately placed where I'd discover them eventually. A ticket stub from a movie we never saw together. A receipt from a restaurant in a town I've never visited. Breadcrumbs leading towards something I'm not sure I want to understand. The candle burns lower each night. I replace it when it gutters out, but the flame never looks quite the same. The shadows shift differently, revealing corners of the room I'd forgotten existed. Sometimes I think I see movement in the periphery, but when I turn, there's only wall, only emptiness. The grit on the table returns no matter how often I clean, invisible to sight but unmistakable to touch, like sand, like dust, like something ground fine by time and pressure. I've stopped trying to identify it. Some mysteries resist solution, demand acceptance instead. The whistle comes again, that same off-key melody drifting through walls that should block such sounds. I've learned not to look for the source. Some things exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, in the gaps where explanation fails. I still turn the photograph face down each morning, still flip it back when darkness comes. The routine has become ritual, a way of marking time in a world where linear progression feels impossible. She looks back at me from the paper, frozen in a moment before everything changed, before the questions multiplied beyond counting. The key grows warmer in my palm, as if responding to some distant signal I can't interpret. Story 4. The chair at the far corner of the room didn't belong there. It had remained slightly turned, facing the window. The rest of the room held its breath, waiting for a signal to confirm the unease that clung to the air. The floorboard beneath my feet whispered as if testing my patience, each tiny creak a reminder of a presence that shouldn't be near. Every tick of the clock felt too slow, as if stretching each second into something more profound, more dangerous. The chair hadn't moved, not that I saw, but the dust along its base wasn't the same as before, suggesting a shift, a presence that hadn't announced itself. I keep coming back to the coffee cup, half empty, still warm when I found it on the kitchen counter. The lipstick stain wasn't mine, a soft coral shade I'd never worn, never owned. The cup sat there like evidence of something I couldn't name, something that made my hands shake when I finally picked it up to wash it clean. The real estate agent had keys. Of course she had keys. She'd mentioned showing the house to other potential buyers, her voice bright and professional over the phone. But the showings were scheduled, weren't they? I thought they were scheduled. The calendar by the refrigerator showed nothing for that afternoon, my handwriting careful and precise in blue ink. Sometimes I catch myself listening for footsteps upstairs. The old house settles, creaks, breathes in ways that fool the ear. But there's a rhythm to settling wood, a randomness to natural sounds. What I hear feels deliberate, measured, like someone trying very hard to be quiet. The neighbor mentioned seeing lights on at odd hours. She stood at her mailbox, squinting against the morning sun, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. Said she'd assumed I was having trouble sleeping. The way she paused after saying it made me wonder what else she'd assumed. I found the basement door unlocked yesterday. I never go down there. The previous owner had converted it into a workshop, left behind tools I don't recognize and wouldn't know how to use. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling was still warm when I touched it. Someone had been down there recently. Someone had been using that space. The coffee cup bothers me more than it should. I've lived alone for months now, settled into routines that comfort me. Morning coffee in the blue mug, never the white one. The white one was hers from before, when this was still our house, when there was still an hour to speak of. She had a key, still has a key, I suppose. I never ask for it back. Some conversations feel too final to have, too much like admitting something you're not ready to admit. But the coral lipstick isn't hers either. She wore deep reds, burgundy shades that left marks on wine glasses and shirt collars. The chair faces the backyard. From that angle you can see the kitchen window, the side door, the driveway where I park my car. You can see the routine of someone's life unfold predictably day after day. You can learn patterns. You can wait for the right moment. I called the real estate agent, asked about recent showings, tried to keep my voice light and curious rather than suspicious and afraid. She checked her records, made small sounds of concentration. No showings scheduled for this week, no other agents with access. Just me and my set of keys and the growing certainty that someone else has been here. The basement workshop smells like sawdust and motor oil. Normal smells for that kind of space. But underneath something else. Something familiar that I can't quite place. A perfume maybe, or shampoo. Something floral and light that doesn't belong among the heavy scents of wood and metal. Last night I dreamed about the chair. In the dream, someone was sitting in it, silhouetted against the window. I couldn't see their face, couldn't tell if they were looking out at the yard or back at me. When I woke up, I went downstairs to check. The chair was empty, of course, but the impression in the cushions suggested recent use. The neighbor's name is written on a piece of paper stuck to my refrigerator. I don't remember writing it down. My handwriting, blue ink, same pen I use for the calendar, but I don't remember the conversation where she told me her name. I remember the comment about the lights, the way she squinted and paused. I don't remember introductions. She left other things, not just the key I never asked for. A toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom, still in its packaging. A book on the nightstand with pages marked by scraps of paper. Small intrusions that could be explained as kindness, as caring, as something else entirely. The real estate agent sounded different on the phone. Less bright, less professional. When I mentioned the unlocked basement door, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked if I'd been having any problems with the house. Problems, such a careful word, such a loaded question. I keep checking the locks, front door, back door, all the windows. Everything secure, everything as it should be. But security is an illusion when someone else has access. When someone else knows your patterns, your routines, your vulnerabilities. The coffee cup is clean now, dried and put away with the others. But I can still see the coral lipstick stain in my mind, still feel the warmth of recently poured coffee. Still wonder who sat at my kitchen counter, comfortable enough to make themselves at home. The chair hasn't moved, I'm sure it hasn't moved. But the dust patterns keep changing, and the cushion keeps showing impressions, and the view from that corner keeps feeling like surveillance rather than coincidence. Tonight I'll check the basement again, look for signs of recent use, evidence of intrusion, try to identify that floral scent that doesn't belong, try to understand why someone would choose that space, that hidden workshop, for whatever purpose brings them here. The neighbor was watering her garden when I looked out this morning. She waved, smiled, called out something about the weather. Normal interaction, friendly gesture. But she was facing my house when she watered, her attention divided between her flowers and my windows. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe living alone has made me paranoid, suspicious of normal sounds and innocent explanations. Maybe the coffee cup was mine after all, the lipstick a shade I forgot I owned. Maybe the basement door never locks properly, and the chair has always faced that direction. But the floral scent in the workshop is getting stronger. Story 5. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the polished wood floor. The air was filled with the faint aroma of morning coffee, mingling with the harsher scent of forgotten incense. As I stepped into the study, my foot brushed against something soft yet out of place, a crumpled velvet pouch lying on the floor. The desk stood immaculate, papers stacked neatly, except for one envelope that lay open, its contents conspicuously absent. There was an unsettling quiet, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the truth to emerge from the corners. I keep coming back to the weight of that pouch in my palm, empty, the drawstring pulled tight then loosened as if someone had been nervous. The velvet was deep burgundy, worn smooth in places where fingers had worried it. I should have left it where I found it, should have called someone, but who do you call when you're not sure what you found? The envelope bore no return address. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, block letters that revealed nothing about the writer except their desire not to be known. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of writing you see on ransom notes in movies, but that thought came later, after everything else started to unravel. She always kept the study locked when she wasn't using it. Always. The key hung on a small hook beside the kitchen window, catching the morning light like a tiny signal. That morning the door stood ajar, not wide open, just enough to suggest someone had left in a hurry or wanted me to notice. The coffee was still warm when I touched the cup. Steam rose in lazy spirals, dissipating in the striped sunlight. 2 cups sat on the desk blotter, though I had only seen 1 car in the driveway. The second cup was barely touched, a faint lipstick mark on the rim, not her shade, too dark, too bold for someone who preferred subtle colors. I've been staying in this house for 3 weeks now. House-sitting, she called it, though the term never felt quite right. The plants needed watering, the mail needed collecting, but mostly I think she needed someone to occupy the space while she was away. The house felt too large for one person, too quiet, too full of corners that seemed to watch. The photograph was face down on the bookshelf. I found it there the second day, though I'm certain it had been upright before. A family portrait, the kind taken at department stores with artificial backgrounds and forced smiles. She was younger then, standing beside a man I'd never seen before. His hand rested on her shoulder, possessive but gentle. A child sat between them, gap-toothed and squinting into the camera flash. I never asked about the photograph. Some silences feel too heavy to break, and she carried hers like a physical weight. But I noticed how she avoided that corner of the room, how her eyes would skip over the bookshelf as if it contained something that might hurt to see. The incense burned in the study every evening, sandalwood and something sharper, more medicinal. She would disappear behind the locked door for hours, and I would hear the soft scratch of pen on paper, the occasional creak of the desk chair. Sometimes, very late, I heard her crying, soft, careful sobs that seemed designed not to carry through the walls. The morning I found the pouch, those sounds made sense in a way they hadn't before. Grief has its own grammar, its own syntax of sighs and silences. I was beginning to understand the language she spoke when she thought no one was listening. The newspaper clipping was tucked inside the desk drawer, folded and refolded until the creases had worn white. The headline was partially obscured, but I could make out enough words to understand. Missing, investigation, no lights. The photograph accompanying the article showed the same man from the family portrait, though the newspaper image was grainier, more urgent. I shouldn't have been looking through her drawers, but the empty envelope seemed to demand answers, and the drawer had been left slightly open, as if she wanted me to find what was inside. Or maybe that's what I told myself to justify the violation. Grief makes voyeurs of us all. The phone rang while I was reading the clipping. 3 short rings, then silence. It had been doing that for days, ever since she left. I stopped answering after the first few times when no one spoke from the other end, just breathing, patient and deliberate before the line went dead. Her departure had been sudden. A phone call in the early morning, hushed conversation in the hallway, then the sound of suitcase wheels on hardwood. She knocked on my bedroom door to explain, but her explanation felt rehearsed, incomplete. Family emergency. Might be gone for weeks. Make yourself at home. The velvet pouch had contained jewelry once. I could tell by the way the fabric held the shape of absent objects, small depressions where rings or earrings had rested. Expensive pieces from the look of the pouch. The kind of jewelry you inherit or receive for anniversaries, for promises meant to last forever. I found the receipt in the kitchen, crumpled in the trash beneath coffee grounds and orange peels. A pawn shop downtown, the address printed in fading ink. The itemized list was brief but telling. Wedding ring, gold, earrings, pearl, necklace, silver chain. The total seemed impossibly small for objects that had once meant everything. The house began to feel different after that discovery. Rooms seemed smaller, shadows longer. I started noticing things I had overlooked before. The way certain floorboards creaked under weight, the draft that came from nowhere in the upstairs hallway, the faint outline on the bedroom wall where a photograph had once hung. She called once while I was watering the plants. Her voice sounded distant, strained, as if she were speaking through layers of gauze. Everything was fine, she said. The situation was more complicated than expected. She might be gone longer than planned. Don't worry about the mail piling up. Don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number. The basement door had been locked since my arrival, but that afternoon I found it standing open. The stairs descended into darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. I called her name, thinking she might have returned without telling me, but only my own echo answered back. The air smelled of dampness and something else, something organic and forgotten. I didn't go down those stairs. Some boundaries feel sacred, even when they're unmarked. But I stood in that doorway for a long time, listening to the house settle around me, wondering what kinds of secrets require burial in darkness. The letters started arriving the next day. No return address, just like the envelope I'd found in the study. But these were addressed to me, my name written in the same careful block letters. Inside, single sentences on expensive paper. She isn't who you think she is. Ask about the accident. Check the garden shed. I should have packed my bags then. Should have called a friend, found a hotel, invented my own emergency. But curiosity is its own kind of gravity, and I was already falling into the orbit of someone else's carefully constructed lie. The garden shed stood at the far end of the property, half hidden behind overgrown hedges. The padlock was new, brass bright against the weathered wood, but the hasp was loose, secured with screws that turned easily in the soft wood. Inside, boxes stacked to the ceiling, each one labeled in that same careful handwriting. Personal effects, documents, evidence. I opened only one box. Inside, photographs scattered like fallen leaves. The same family from the portrait, but these were candid shots, unguarded moments. Birthday parties, holidays, ordinary afternoons that someone had thought worth preserving. In every image, the man's face had been carefully cut away, leaving empty spaces where his smile should have been. The child in the photographs grew older as I sifted through them. Gap-toothed grin becoming serious expression, small hands growing longer, face changing shape in the way that faces do when childhood ends. In the final photographs, the child stood alone, the cutaway spaces beside them like wounds in the paper. That night I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, the kind of walking people do when they're trying not to wake someone. I lay in bed, hardly breathing, listening to the careful placement of each step. The footsteps paused outside my door, and I imagined someone standing there in the darkness, listening to me listen to them. The footsteps continued past my room, down the hallway toward the study. I heard the soft click of a door opening, the whisper of papers being moved, then silence, long and complete, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. When I finally gathered courage to investigate, the hallway was empty. The study door stood closed and locked, the key hanging in its usual place beside the kitchen window, but the scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, mixed with something else, something that smelled like fear. The truth, when it came, arrived in fragments. A phone call to the police department asking about missing persons reports. A conversation with a neighbor who had lived across the street for 40 years. A visit to the library, scrolling through archived newspaper articles on a computer that hummed too loudly in the afternoon quiet. The man in the photographs had disappeared during a camping trip. His car was found at a trailhead, keys in the ignition, wallet on the dashboard. No signs of struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. The search lasted for weeks, volunteers combing through miles of wilderness, but the forest kept its secrets. She had been questioned, of course, spouses always are, but her alibi was solid, her grief apparent and convincing. She had been visiting her sister in another state when he disappeared, surrounded by witnesses who could account for every hour of her absence. The investigation eventually grew cold, filed away with all the other mysteries that refused to solve themselves. The child had been with her during that trip. I found the airline tickets in another box, evidence of their absence during the crucial days. But children remember things differently than adults do, and memories can be shaped by suggestion, by the stories we tell ourselves about what we've seen and done. I started watching the news differently after that, paying attention to stories about missing persons, about investigations that stall and fade. There are so many people who simply vanish, leaving behind only questions and the people who claim to love them. Some disappearances are violent, dramatic, the kind that make headlines and spawn documentaries. Others are quiet, subtle, the kind that happen in plain sight while everyone looks the other way. The letters kept coming, each one containing a single piece of a larger puzzle. She practiced her grief in the mirror. The insurance money bought this house. Ask her about the camping gear in the basement. Each message felt like a breadcrumb leading deeper into a forest I wasn't sure I wanted to explore. I never did go down to the basement. Some doors are meant to stay closed, some questions better left unasked. But I thought about those stairs often, about what kinds of secrets require burial in darkness. The house held its breath around that locked door, as if something down there might wake up if we made too much noise. She returned on a morning when the light fell differently through the blinds, casting new patterns on the polished floor. I heard her key in the lock, the familiar sound of her footsteps in the entryway. She called my name, her voice bright and normal, as if nothing had changed in her absence. But everything had changed, and we both knew it. She stood in the kitchen doorway, studying my face with the careful attention of someone reading a foreign language. Her eyes moved to the stack of letters on the counter, the newspaper clippings I had left spread across the table like evidence in a trial that would never come. We didn't speak about what I had found. Some conversations exist in the space between words, in the careful way people avoid looking directly at each other. She made coffee with hands that shook slightly, and I pretended not to notice the way she kept glancing toward the basement door. The velvet pouch appeared on my pillow that night, no longer empty. Inside, a single key I didn't recognize, warm as if someone had been holding it for a long time. I never asked what door it opened, and she never offered to explain. Some gifts are too dangerous to unwrap completely. I left the next morning, my bags packed before dawn. She stood at the kitchen window as I loaded my car, her silhouette backlit by the early sun. We waved goodbye like neighbors, like strangers, like people who had shared a house but never really met. The phone call started a week later. 3 rings, then silence, patient breathing on the other end before the line goes dead. I don't answer anymore, but I keep the phone charged, keep it close. Some conversations are worth waiting for, even when you're not sure you want to hear what the other person has to say. Sometimes I drive past the house, slow enough to see the windows, but not so slow that anyone might notice. The study window is always dark now, the blinds drawn tight against the morning light. But I imagine I can still smell the incense, still hear the soft scratch of pen on paper, the careful sobs of someone practicing their grief in an empty room. The velvet pouch sits in my desk drawer now, the key heavy against my palm when I hold it. I tell myself I threw away the letters, burned the newspaper clippings, forgot the address of that house and the woman who lived there with her carefully constructed silences. But memory is its own kind of evidence, and some truths refuse to stay buried. The morning light still filters through my blinds, casting familiar shadows across the floor. And sometimes, when the air is still and the house is quiet, I catch the faint scent of sandalwood, mixed with something that might be fear, or might be recognition, or might be the smell of secrets finally ready to surface. Story 6. The reflection that shouldn't exist, asterisk. The faucet dripped in a rhythm slightly offbeat, the drops colder than I remembered. Patterns in the wallpaper seemed to shift, lines no longer meeting where they should. I had locked the door 3 times before, but now it stood ajar, whispering an uninvited presence. The clock's hands circled back, yet the hours felt misplaced, a disarray of past and present. A flicker of movement caught in the corner of my eye where stillness should have been. It was then I noticed the reflection that shouldn't exist. The mirror above the bathroom sink showed 2 toothbrushes where there should have been 1. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer, studying the bristles of that second brush worn down, used recently. The blue handle was familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I lived alone, had lived alone for months now, ever since she disappeared. My fingers traced the edge of the medicine cabinet, searching for an explanation that wouldn't come. Inside, bottles of prescription medication bore labels with her name, dates from weeks after she vanished. The pharmacist would have records. Someone had been picking up her prescriptions, using her insurance, maintaining the illusion that she was still here, still breathing, still needing her antidepressants and sleep aids. The detective assigned to her case had kind eyes but tired hands that shuffled papers without conviction. Missing persons reports stacked high on his desk, each one a story interrupted, a life suspended between presence and absence. He assured me they were doing everything possible, but his voice carried the weight of too many unsolved cases, too many families left wondering. I started keeping a journal, documenting every detail that felt wrong. The way her coffee mug appeared in the sink some mornings, still warm to the touch. How her favorite sweater would be draped over the chair where I never left it. The subtle scent of her perfume lingering in rooms I hadn't entered in days. Either I was losing my grip on reality, or someone wanted me to believe I was. Her sister called frequently, voice strained with hope that had begun to curdle into something darker. She mentioned seeing a figure that looked like her at the grocery store, always from behind, always disappearing around corners before recognition could take hold. The woman at the post office claimed someone matching her description had been picking up mail, but the security cameras never seemed to capture the right angle, the right moment. The bank statements arrived like clockwork, showing small withdrawals from her account. $20 here, $50 there, amounts small enough to avoid triggering alerts, but consistent enough to suggest a pattern. Someone who knew her habits, her spending patterns, her PIN number. The transactions occurred at different locations, always during busy hours when cameras captured crowds rather than faces. I began following these electronic breadcrumbs, visiting each ATM location, speaking with clerks and security guards who might remember something unusual. A gas station attendant recalled a woman in a baseball cap and sunglasses, always paying cash, never removing the hat. The description could have fit thousands of people, but something in his tone suggested he was holding back details he couldn't quite articulate. The apartment we had shared felt different now, charged with an energy that made me question every shadow. I found myself checking the locks obsessively, testing windows, examining every surface for signs of intrusion. The spare key we kept hidden under a loose brick had been moved slightly, repositioned in a way that suggested someone else's fingers had disturbed its resting place. Her laptop remained password protected, but I knew her well enough to guess the combinations she favored. Inside, I discovered browser history that post-dated her disappearance. Searches for new identities, untraceable credit cards, ways to disappear completely. Either someone was using her computer, or she had planned this vanishing more carefully than anyone imagined. The photographs in our shared albums told a story I hadn't noticed before. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, her smile had grown increasingly forced, her eyes scanning backgrounds as if searching for threats. She stood closer to exits in public places, positioned herself with clear views of entrances. Someone who knew her well might interpret these as signs of paranoia, but they could equally suggest legitimate fear. Her coworkers described subtle changes in her behavior during those final weeks. Longer lunch breaks with no explanation of where she went, phone calls taken in private, conversations conducted in whispers. She had requested copies of all her employment records, claiming she needed them for insurance purposes, but Human Resources found the request unusual given her tenure and benefit status. The storage unit rental receipt tucked inside her jewelry box led me to a facility across town. The manager, a weathered man with suspicious eyes, claimed no knowledge of what tenants kept in their units. Unit 47 had been paid for 6 months in advance, cash transaction, no questions asked. The lock was new, industrial grade, the kind used by people who understood the value of keeping secrets secure. Inside, I found evidence of a life being carefully dismantled. Boxes of important documents, copies of birth certificates and social security cards, bundles of cash wrapped in plastic bags. A suitcase packed with clothes I recognized, toiletries arranged as if for immediate departure. Most disturbing were the photographs of me, taken from distances that suggested surveillance, documentation of my routines and habits. The private investigator I hired spoke in measured tones about the complexity of disappearance cases. People vanished for countless reasons: fear, debt, relationships gone wrong, or simply the desire to become someone else entirely. He explained how easy it had become to establish new identities, particularly for someone with time to plan and resources to execute their escape. His background check revealed details about her past that I had never known. A previous name change, sealed juvenile records, a pattern of relocating that stretched back years before we met. The woman I thought I knew completely had been carrying secrets that predated our relationship, mysteries that now cast our entire time together in a different light. The phone call started shortly after I hired the investigator. Heavy breathing, then silence, sometimes background noise that sounded like traffic or crowded spaces. The caller ID showed blocked numbers, untraceable connections that lasted just long enough to unnerve me before cutting out. Someone was watching my efforts to find the truth, monitoring my progress with uncomfortable attention. Her mother, a woman I had met only twice, agreed to speak with me over coffee at a diner that smelled of grease and desperation. She chain-smoked throughout our conversation, her fingers trembling as she described a daughter who had always been running from something. Even as a child, she had possessed an ability to reinvent herself, to become whoever she needed to be for survival. The stories her mother told painted a picture of someone far more complex than the woman who had shared my bed and my dreams. Episodes of disappearing for days without explanation, relationships that ended abruptly and completely, a pattern of cutting ties when connections became too deep or demanding. I began to wonder if I had been just another temporary stop in a longer journey toward invisibility. The detective called to inform me that her case was being moved to inactive status. Not closed, he emphasized, but no longer actively investigated unless new evidence emerged. The resources had to be allocated to cases with fresher leads, more promising avenues of investigation. He suggested I consider the possibility that she had left voluntarily, that some people simply chose to disappear. But the prescription bottles with recent dates suggested otherwise. Someone was maintaining her medical care, ensuring she had access to medications that required regular monitoring. The doctor who had prescribed them claimed patient confidentiality prevented him from discussing her visits, but his nervous manner suggested he was hiding information that could change everything. I started spending evenings in my car outside his office, watching patients come and go, searching faces for familiar features. The woman who emerged late one evening wore different hair and clothes that disguised her shape, but her walk was unmistakable. The way she favored her left foot, the particular rhythm of her steps, details that couldn't be changed or hidden completely. Following her led me through a maze of suburban streets to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. She entered a small house with drawn curtains and an overgrown yard, the kind of place designed to avoid attention. I waited until darkness fell completely before approaching, my heart hammering against my ribs as I peered through gaps in the window coverings. The interior was sparse but lived in. A single plate on the kitchen table, medications lined up on the counter, the same brand of tea she had always preferred. On the mantel sat photographs. I recognized pictures of us together, but with my image carefully cut away, leaving only her smiling face beside empty spaces where I used to be. The sound of a key in the front door sent me scrambling back to my car, but not before I glimpsed her silhouette moving through the house with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She was alive, established, living a parallel existence while I grieved her disappearance and questioned my sanity. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. She appeared at my apartment the next evening, standing in the doorway as if she had never left. Her appearance had changed: shorter hair, different makeup, clothes that transformed her into someone almost unfamiliar. But her eyes held the same mixture of affection and calculation that I now recognized as her defining characteristic. She spoke about needing space, about feeling trapped by expectations and commitments she couldn't fulfill. The disappearance hadn't been planned to hurt me, she claimed, but to give herself room to breathe, to figure out who she really was beneath the layers of identity she had accumulated over the years. The prescriptions, the bank withdrawals, the storage unit, all part of maintaining a safety net while she decided what came next. Her explanation felt rehearsed, polished by repetition, but underneath the careful words was something that might have been genuine regret. She had watched me search for her, had seen the pain her absence caused, but hadn't known how to return without destroying the fragile new existence she had built. The phone calls had been attempts to reach out, moments of weakness when she almost revealed herself completely. The detective was not surprised when I reported finding her alive. He had seen similar cases before, situations where the missing person was never really missing, just hidden from view by their own design. There would be paperwork to file, reports to update, but no crime had been committed beyond the emotional damage inflicted on those left behind to wonder and worry. But questions remained that her explanations couldn't address. The surveillance photographs suggested planning that went beyond a spontaneous need for space. The careful documentation of my routines implied purposes that extended beyond simple observation. Someone who truly wanted to disappear wouldn't maintain such detailed connections to their former life. The storage unit had contained more than just escape supplies. Hidden beneath the obvious items were documents related to other people, other relationships that had ended in similar disappearances. Names and addresses of individuals who might have their own stories of sudden abandonment, their own experiences with someone who specialized in vanishing without explanation. The private investigator's final report included background information that painted a disturbing picture of a person who had perfected the art of temporary intimacy. Multiple previous identities, relationships that followed similar patterns, a trail of confused and abandoned partners stretching back years. I had been neither the first nor likely the last to experience this particular form of emotional devastation. She returned to collect her remaining belongings while I was at work, leaving behind only the items that connected her to our shared history. The photographs from the mantel were gone, along with anything that might serve as evidence of her temporary resurrection. The apartment felt hollow in a way that went beyond simple emptiness, as if her presence had been so carefully erased that even memories began to feel uncertain. The toothbrush disappeared from the bathroom, leaving only my own reflection in the mirror above the sink. But sometimes in peripheral vision, I still catch glimpses of movement that shouldn't exist, shadows that suggest presence where logic insists there should be none. The mind, once convinced of haunting, struggles to accept the absence of ghosts. The case remains officially closed, but the questions multiply rather than diminish with time. How many others are out there, living parallel lives while their former partners struggle with grief and confusion? How many missing persons reports describe people who are hiding rather than harmed, who have chosen invisibility over explanation? The reflection that shouldn't exist was never supernatural, just the evidence of a life carefully constructed to remain hidden in plain sight. But knowing the truth doesn't diminish its power to disturb, to suggest that the people we think we know completely might be strangers wearing familiar faces, temporary visitors in our lives who specialize in leaving without saying goodbye. Story 7. It wasn't the first broken mug left on the kitchen counter. The pieces fit together cleanly, as if waiting to be swept away, but remained untouched. A kettle hummed softly, its whistle curiously absent despite the steam. I noticed the trash bag wasn't tied, though it never quite overflowed. The clock ticked, but the hand seemed stubborn, as if resisting change. I poured a glass of water, watching the ripples settle without drinking. In the hallway, the mirror was slightly tilted, reflecting just enough of the room to seem unchanged. I left a window ajar, letting a breeze thread through unnoticed, as if it never mattered at all. The house felt suspended in amber, each detail preserved but wrong somehow. I'd been living here for months, yet everything seemed unfamiliar in the morning light. The coffee grounds scattered near the machine told a story I thought I remembered. My roommate had always been clumsy in the early hours, rushing to catch the bus downtown. She worked at the insurance office, filing claims and answering phones with practiced patience. That morning she'd left earlier than usual. I remembered hearing the front door close with its familiar squeak, the one we'd been meaning to oil for weeks. Her keys jingled as she fumbled with the lock, then silence settled over the house like dust. I'd rolled over in bed, pulling the covers higher, grateful for the extra hour of sleep. When I finally emerged, the kitchen bore the evidence of her hurried departure. The broken mug her favorite, the blue one with tiny flowers, sat in neat fragments on the counter. She must have knocked it over while reaching for the sugar, then carefully gathered the pieces, perhaps hoping to glue them back together later. The kettle still steamed because she'd forgotten to turn it off, distracted by the accident and her ticking clock. I found the note propped against the fruit bowl. Gone to work early. Big presentation today. Will be late tonight. Don't wait up. Her handwriting slanted slightly to the right, the way it always did when she wrote quickly. Everything made perfect sense. Yet as I stood there, bare feet against the cold linoleum, something crawled up my spine. The broken mug pieces fit too perfectly, as if they'd been arranged rather than gathered. The kettle's whistle should have been screaming by now, but it hummed with an almost musical quality that seemed impossible. I reached toward the steam and felt nothing, no heat, no moisture against my palm. The note crinkled between my fingers, but when I looked closer, the ink seemed too fresh, too deliberate. Had she really written, "Don't wait up," in that careful script when she was supposedly rushing? I walked to the hallway mirror, meaning to straighten it, but stopped when I saw the reflection. The kitchen behind me looked different, cleaner somehow, as if the broken mug wasn't there at all. I turned around quickly, heart hammering, but the pieces remained scattered on the counter, catching the light like accusations. The smell hit me then, not coffee or the usual morning scents, but something else, something metallic and cold that seemed to rise from the floorboards themselves. I knelt down, pressing my nose to the wood, breathing deeply. The scent was strongest near the back door, where muddy footprints should have been but weren't. My memory began to shift, like sand disturbed by an incoming tide. Had I actually heard the door close that morning, or had I dreamed it? The sound echoed in my mind, but now it seemed to come from somewhere else, not the front entrance, but the basement door, the one that stuck and required force to open. I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking a familiar song. The basement smelled of damp concrete and old cardboard boxes, but underneath lurked that same metallic scent, stronger now, almost overwhelming. In the corner near the water heater, the concrete looked darker, stained perhaps, though I couldn't remember any leaks. My hands shook as I touched the wall, feeling for the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move independently. The dark stain wasn't water damage. It was too red, too fresh, spreading in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. But that was impossible. My roommate had gone to work. I had her note, had heard her leave, had seen the evidence of her morning routine upstairs. I climbed back to the kitchen, moving like a sleepwalker. The note was still there, but now the handwriting looked different, too careful, too practiced, as if someone had traced over familiar letters. The broken mug pieces seemed to pulse in the morning light, and I realized they weren't from her favorite cup at all. This china was thicker, older, with a pattern I didn't recognize. The kettle had stopped humming. I poured that glass of water with trembling hands, watching the ripples settle into perfect stillness. But I couldn't drink. My throat felt closed, constricted by a truth I couldn't quite grasp. The water reflected my face, but the eyes looking back seemed like a stranger's, wide, frightened, guilty. The phone rang, shrill and demanding. I let it ring 4 times before answering, my voice barely a whisper. "She didn't come in today," the voice on the other end said. "Is she sick? The presentation was moved to next week anyway, so there's no rush, but we were expecting her." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the counter. The presentation was moved, but her note said it was today, said that's why she'd left early. I stared at the basement door, its wooden surface scarred from years of use. Had I gone downstairs this morning, or had that been another day, another version of events that my mind had twisted into this moment? The metallic smell seemed to seep upward through the floorboards, filling my nostrils with its insistent presence. My memory felt like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from different boxes. I remembered her voice from the night before, but was it angry or afraid? I remembered movement in the dark, but was I following or fleeing? The sound of something breaking, but was it the mug or something else entirely? I walked to the window, needing air, needing space between myself and these walls that seemed to be closing in. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked incessantly, the same 3 sharp yaps repeated endlessly. It had been barking like that all morning, I realized, or perhaps all night. Dogs barked when they sensed disturbance, when something was wrong in their carefully ordered world. The breeze through the open window carried the scent of rain, but also something else, that same metallic smell that seemed to follow me through the house. I pressed my face against the screen, breathing deeply, trying to clear my head. But clarity brought no comfort. In the growing light of day, I began to understand that there were 2 versions of this morning, 2 sets of memories that couldn't both be true. In one, my roommate had left for work, clumsy and rushed but alive, leaving behind the debris of an ordinary morning. In the other, something had happened in the dark hours before dawn, something that explained the stains in the basement and the too perfect arrangement of broken china. I couldn't remember which version was real. Perhaps I didn't want to remember. The house settled around me with small creaks and sighs, as if it too were trying to decide which story to tell. The tilted mirror in the hallway reflected fragments of both possibilities, the innocent morning routine and the darker alternative that lurked beneath the surface of my consciousness. I found myself standing at the basement door again, my hand on the knob. Behind me, the broken mug pieces caught the light, waiting to be swept away, but somehow always remaining. The kettle sat silent now, its message delivered or forgot. The note with its careful handwriting seemed to shimmer in my peripheral vision, there and not there, real and fabricated. I turned the knob and stepped into the darkness below, carrying both versions of the truth with me. In the basement's musty embrace, surrounded by the smell of secrets and the weight of uncertainty, I realized that some questions are more powerful than their answers. Some truths are too fragile to survive in the harsh light of certainty. The stain on the concrete floor waited for me, dark and patient, holding its own version of events. Above me, the house continued its quiet existence, preserving the evidence of a morning that might have happened exactly as I remembered, or might have been something else entirely. I knelt beside the stain, pressing my palm against the cold concrete, and wondered if the truth mattered less than the story we choose to believe. The basement held its secrets close, offering no easy answers, no clean resolution to the puzzle of memory and guilt that had brought me to this moment. In the distance, the neighbor's dog continued its endless barking, a soundtrack to uncertainty that would follow me long after I climbed those stairs again, returning to a kitchen where broken things waited to be mended or swept away, where notes told stories that might or might not be true, where the absence of answers had become the only truth I could trust. Story 8. The main office was logged as vacant upon initial inspection at 800 hours. The desks were orderly, with reports stacked neatly in 3 piles in descending order of priority. The clock on the wall read 7:45, its hands unmoving. One chair was in mid-swivel, positioned halfway between 2 workstations. The external surveillance system recorded no entries after the previous evening. The filing cabinet drawers were closed, save one, which was open by exactly 1 inch. All computers were powered down, but the monitor on the leftmost desk displayed a blank screen. There should not have been any active systems, and yet. I touched the edge of the desk now, months later. My fingers find the same groove where someone once pressed too hard with a pen. The wood is cool, indifferent. I remember writing that report, each word measured, each detail cataloged. But memory shifts like sand through fingers, and I wonder if I'm remembering the room or the photograph of the room or the reconstruction we built afterward when nothing made sense. The chair still moves when I push it, a soft whisper of wheels against carpet. Halfway between two workstations, the report said, I wrote that, but why did I choose those words? Two workstations, not desks, not positions, workstations. There was coffee in the break room that morning, still warm. I didn't include that in the initial report. Someone made coffee and left it brewing. The machine was on a timer, my partner said later, always on a timer. But I remember the smell, rich and bitter, curling through the air like an accusation. He was thorough, my partner, methodical. He measured the gap in the filing cabinet drawer 3 times, 1 inch exactly, not approximate, exact, as if someone had used a ruler, as if precision mattered more than purpose. Nobody leaves a drawer open 1 inch by accident, he said. Or maybe I said it, the conversation blurs now, voices merging in the echo chamber of memory. We stood in that office for hours, cataloging the ordinary, searching for the extraordinary. The silence was thick enough to taste. I find myself returning to the monitor, blank screen, powered down but active, the contradiction that started everything. Technical support confirmed it later the system had been remotely accessed, but accessed for what? The hard drives yielded nothing, clean as surgical instruments, too clean. The missing person report came 3 days later, filed by a neighbor who noticed uncollected mail. Standard procedure. But I knew before the call came through. I knew because of the chair, the drawer, the monitor that shouldn't have been on. Someone had been there, someone who understood the space intimately enough to leave it almost undisturbed. Almost. I close my eyes and try to reconstruct that first morning. The way light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the floor. The hum of fluorescent tubes overhead. The absence that felt like presence, heavy and watching. The reports were organized by priority. High, medium, low, 3 neat stacks, but one page was upside down in the medium pile. A single sheet, inverted. I photographed it before anyone could straighten it. The page detailed a routine background check, nothing remarkable, but someone had touched it last, had placed it just so. Messages on the answering machine, all routine, appointment confirmations, a reminder about a dental cleaning, the mundane architecture of a life that continued until it didn't. The last message was a hang-up. Silence, then the soft click of disconnection. Timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. Could be anyone, my partner said. Wrong number. But wrong numbers don't usually wait through 4 rings before hanging up. Wrong numbers don't breathe softly into the receiver for 7 seconds before the line goes dead. I counted. 7 seconds of someone listening to an empty office, waiting for something that never came. The building's security guard remembered nothing unusual. Quiet evening, he said, quiet as the grave, an unfortunate choice of words that seemed to amuse him. He'd made his rounds every 2 hours, checking doors, testing locks, everything secure, everything normal. But normal is a fragile construction. Normal assumes patterns hold, that people behave predictably, that offices don't rearrange themselves in the night like furniture in a fever dream. I interviewed the neighbors. The office shared the building with an accounting firm and a small law practice. Nobody heard anything. Nobody saw anything. The hallways were carpeted, footsteps muffled. You could walk from one end to the other without making a sound if you knew how to place your feet. The missing person had no family, few friends, a life lived in the margins, notable mainly for its lack of notation. Credit cards unused for 3 days, bank account untouched, as if someone had simply stepped out of the world, leaving behind only questions and a chair turned halfway between destinations. I dream about that office sometimes. In the dreams, I'm always arriving too late, always finding the same scene, but details shift. Sometimes the clock shows a different time. Sometimes there are 4 stacks of reports instead of 3. Sometimes the drawer is open 2 inches, not 1. The subconscious mind is an unreliable witness, editing evidence to fit theories that don't quite hold. The case file grows thicker but not clearer. Statements, photographs, technical reports, each piece of paper another layer of sediment covering the truth. We interviewed colleagues, checked phone records, traced internet activity. Standard procedure. But standard procedures assume standard situations, and nothing about this felt standard. There was a coffee cup in the sink, washed but not dried. Someone had taken the time to clean up but left evidence of the cleaning. The cup was blue ceramic, unremarkable except for its cleanliness. Forensics found no prints, no DNA, clean as the hard drives, clean as the conscience of whoever orchestrated this careful disappearance. People don't just vanish, my partner insisted. But they do. They vanish into spaces between certainties, into the gaps where logic fails and questions multiply like bacteria in warm darkness. They vanish into the difference between what we observe and what we understand. The investigation stalled after 6 weeks. No leads, no suspects, no crime scene, just an empty office and a growing sense that we were asking the wrong questions. But what were the right questions? How do you investigate an absence? How do you interrogate silence? I requested the file be kept active. My partner moved on to other cases with bodies and witnesses and evidence that led somewhere, but I couldn't let go. Something about the precision of it, the careful staging, the message hidden in plain sight. The building manager found a key under the mat 3 weeks after we'd sealed the office. Not the missing person's key. A spare, filed smooth at the edges from use. Someone else had access. Someone who knew about the spare key and felt comfortable using it. Probably been there for months, the manager said. But the mat was clean underneath. No dirt, no impressions. The key had been placed recently after we'd finished processing the scene. Someone was still coming and going, still had business in that empty office. I started watching the building at night, unofficial surveillance off the books. My partner would have called it obsession, and maybe he would have been right. But obsession and dedication wear the same face in fluorescent light, and I needed to know. 3 nights of nothing, empty hallways, locked doors, the building settling into darkness like an old man into sleep. But on the 4th night, a light flickered on the 3rd floor, brief as a heartbeat, then gone. The missing person's office was on the 3rd floor. I checked with security, no record of entry, no alarms triggered, but light doesn't generate itself, doesn't flicker on and off without human intervention. Someone was up there, moving through the darkness with purpose and familiarity. The next morning I found the office exactly as we'd left it, sealed, undisturbed, silent, but the air felt different, warmer, as if someone had been breathing in that space, using up oxygen, leaving behind the invisible evidence of presence. The missing person's appointment book revealed a pattern. Meetings every Tuesday at 3 p.m. marked only with initials. No names, no contact information, just 2 letters repeated week after week. The meetings had continued until the disappearance, then stopped. But who meets with ghosts, who keeps appointments with the vanished? I traced the initials through cross-referencing, database searches, educated guesses. Dozens of possibilities, none quite fitting. But patterns exist to be broken, and maybe these initials were never meant to identify a person. Maybe they marked something else, a place, a time, a concept too dangerous to name directly. The breakthrough came by accident. I was reviewing the crime scene photographs when I noticed something in the background of one shot. A reflection in the window, distorted by glass and distance, but unmistakably human. Someone had been standing across the street when the photograph was taken. Someone watching the watchers. Enhancement revealed little. A figure in dark clothing, face obscured by shadow and angle. But the posture suggested familiarity, comfort. This wasn't a casual observer. This was someone with a vested interest in our investigation, someone who needed to know what we were learning. I checked the other photographs. In 3 of them, barely visible, the same figure appeared in reflections, in background spaces, always watching. A surveillance of the surveillance, the hunter being hunted, or perhaps the reverse. In this game, roles shifted like shadows at noon. The missing person's computer yielded nothing under normal analysis, but deeper excavation revealed deleted files, fragments of data scrubbed but not destroyed, email drafts never sent, document revisions that told a story in negative space. Someone had been planning to leave, not suddenly, not in panic, but methodically. Files organized, accounts settled, loose ends tied. The disappearance wasn't abduction or accident, it was orchestration, but orchestrated by whom, and why leave clues for us to find? My partner was transferred to another district. Coincidence, the department said, budget constraints, personnel reshuffling. But coincidences accumulate weight when they align too neatly. Someone wanted fresh eyes on other cases, old eyes off this one. I requested a new partner, request denied. Temporary reassignment, they said. Work the case solo until resources allowed otherwise. But resources never allowed otherwise, and I found myself alone with the questions, alone with the growing certainty that answers were dangerous. The office building changed hands 6 months after the disappearance. New management, new policies. The missing person's office was renovated, repurposed, sanitized of memory. But I kept the key, the spare key found under the mat. Evidence of what I couldn't say, but evidence nonetheless. Sometimes I use the key. Late at night when the building sleeps and security guards doze at their desks. The office is different now, painted and carpeted and furnished for new purposes, but the bones remain the same. The same windows, the same walls, the same silence that holds secrets like water holds drowning. I sit in the space where the desk used to be and try to feel what happened here. Try to sense the moment when ordinary became extraordinary, when someone chose to step out of their life and into something else. The air gives up nothing. The walls keep their counsel. The case remains open but inactive, a file in a cabinet, gathering dust and bureaucratic indifference. Missing persons become cold cases, become forgotten mysteries. The machinery of justice grinds forward, leaving behind the unsolvable, the inconvenient, the questions that don't yield to procedure. But I remember the chair turned halfway between destinations. I remember the drawer opened exactly 1 inch. I remember the monitor that shouldn't have been active, the coffee that stayed warm, the silence that felt like presence. I remember, and in remembering, I keep the mystery alive, not solved, perhaps never solvable, but alive in the spaces between certainty and doubt. Someone wanted to disappear completely, but they left traces. Intentionally or otherwise, they left breadcrumbs for those willing to follow. The trail leads everywhere and nowhere. into the labyrinth of human motivation, into the shadows where logic fails and intuition whispers of truths too dangerous to speak aloud. I follow because I must, because the alternative is accepting that some questions have no answers, some mysteries no solutions. And perhaps that's the real truth hiding in that empty office. Perhaps the mystery is the message, the question more important than any answer. Perhaps someone disappeared not to escape, but to create this moment, this eternal searching, this hunger for understanding that can never be satisfied. I touch the groove in the desk one more time. My fingers find the familiar depression, the mark left by pressure applied with purpose. Someone sat here once, writing something important enough to leave permanent traces. The wood remembers what flesh forgets, holds the evidence of presence long after presence fades. The mystery remains. The office stands empty, refilled, emptied again in the endless cycle of commercial space. But the questions persist, patient as stone, waiting for someone willing to ask them properly. I am that someone for now, until I too disappear into the spaces between answers, leaving behind only traces for the next investigator to find and puzzle over, and ultimately abandon to the silence that swallows all certainties. The chair still moves when I push it, still whispers across the carpet like a secret being shared. Halfway between destinations, always halfway, never quite arriving where it was meant to go. Story 9. I told them I was asleep when it happened, that nothing had stirred me from the depths of night. They took notes, glancing up briefly, then moved to the next question. But the hem of my pant leg was damp from the wet grass, and a faint metallic taste lingered in the back of my throat. The ticking clock seemed unnaturally loud, its steady beat measuring moments I couldn't account for. A draft crept through the room, chilling my skin, and the distant hum of traffic played like a distant warning. I hadn't mentioned the headlights that froze briefly on the wall, or the shape they revealed, but I could still feel the moisture in my shoes. The nausea comes in waves now. It started before they left, before the questions stopped echoing in my head. My stomach churns like it's trying to expel something that isn't there, something that exists only in the spaces between my thoughts. The feeling clings to me like fog, dense and suffocating, making everything appear distorted through its haze. I keep touching the fabric of my pants where the dampness was. The moisture has dried, but my fingers remember the cold wetness, the way it soaked through to my skin. How did grass stains get there? The question surfaces and disappears before I can grasp it fully. My mind skips like a broken record, jumping from one fragment to another without warning. The woman with the badge had kind eyes, or maybe they were calculating. Memory plays tricks when you're trying too hard to remember, when every detail feels weighted with significance you can't quite name. She asked about the window, the one that faces the garden. I told her I keep the curtains drawn, but that wasn't entirely true. There was a gap, just a sliver where the fabric didn't quite meet, enough to see out, enough for light to creep in. The headlights swept across that gap like a searchlight, illuminating the wall opposite my bed. For a moment, everything was stark white in black shadows. The shape on the wall wasn't mine. It was too tall, too angular, moving in ways that didn't match my breathing or the natural shift of a sleeping body. But I was asleep. I told them I was asleep. My throat feels raw, as if I've been screaming, though I can't remember making a sound. The metallic taste persists, coating my tongue like I've been sucking on coins. It reminds me of something, but the association slips away before it can form completely. Blood tastes metallic, doesn't it? But there was no blood, at least none that I saw. The garden looks different in daylight, smaller somehow, less mysterious than it appeared through that gap in the curtains. The roses are wilting, their petals scattered across the path like confetti after a celebration nobody remembers attending. I planted those roses myself, but I can't recall when. The memory of digging, of soil under my fingernails, feels borrowed from someone else's life. There's a depression in the earth near the fence, a shallow indentation that could be from anything. A dog digging, maybe, or a child's forgotten game. But the shape bothers me, the way it seems too purposeful, too deliberate. The soil looks darker there, richer somehow, as if it's been recently disturbed and then carefully smoothed over. The detective with the notebook asked if I lived alone. Such a simple question, yet I hesitated before answering. Yes, I live alone, but the house feels crowded lately, full of presence I can't identify or explain. Footsteps that might be the settling of old wood, whispers that could be the wind through the eaves, the sensation of being watched by eyes that aren't there. I find myself checking the locks obsessively, turning the deadbolt again and again until the clicking sound becomes a rhythm, a meditation that doesn't bring peace. The front door, the back door, the windows all secure, but security is an illusion when the threat might already be inside, woven into the fabric of your own consciousness. The shoes sit by the door where I left them, but I don't remember taking them off. They're my shoes, certainly worn and familiar, but the mud caked on their soles tells a story I can't quite read. Grass stains on the sides, a small tear in the left one that I swear wasn't there before. When did I walk through mud? When did I walk anywhere? Sleep has become elusive, slipping away whenever I try to grasp it. I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak is amplified, every settling sound transformed into something significant. The darkness behind my eyelids is populated with fragments of images that don't quite coalesce into memory. A flash of movement in my peripheral vision. A door closing somewhere in the house, though I'm certain all the doors were already closed. The feeling of cold air on my face, as if I'd been standing outside in the wind. But I was in bed. I was asleep. I told them I was asleep. The woman detective had a small scar on her chin, a thin white line that caught the light when she turned her head. She asked about my relationship with the neighbors, whether I'd noticed anything unusual lately. Unusual. The word seems to mock me now, as if my entire existence has become a study in the unusual, the inexplicable, the just out of reach. My neighbor to the left plays piano late into the night. Chopin, I think, though I'm no expert. The melancholy notes drift through the walls, creating a soundtrack for insomnia. But that night, the night they asked about, there was no piano. The silence was complete, oppressive, broken only by sounds I can't quite categorize. A rustling that might have been leaves or fabric or something else entirely. A soft thud like a book falling or a door closing gently. The creak of floorboards, but not mine, not in my house. These sounds came from outside, from the garden, from the space between sleeping and waking where reality becomes negotiable. I keep returning to the gap in the curtains, that sliver of visibility that I claimed wasn't there. Through it, the garden was a stage set for a play I didn't understand. The roses swayed without wind, their movements hypnotic and wrong. The path seemed to pulse with its own light, drawing the eye toward the fence, toward the shadows that pooled there like spilled ink. The shape on the wall when the headlights swept across haunts me. It was human, certainly, but distorted, elongated, as if stretched by forces I couldn't see. The silhouette suggested someone standing very close to the window, close enough that their breath would fog the glass, but the window was closed. I always keep the windows closed. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looks unfamiliar, as if the person staring back is someone I've never met. The eyes are too bright, too alert for someone who claims to have been sleeping. There's a scratch on my cheek that I don't remember getting, three thin lines that could be from anything. A branch, perhaps, or fingernails, or the edge of something sharp encountered in darkness. The detective asked if I owned any gardening tools, shovels specifically. The question seemed innocent enough, but it lodged in my mind like a splinter, small and irritating and impossible to ignore. Of course I own gardening tools. Everyone who has a garden owns tools. But when I went to check, to inventory what I had, some things seemed out of place. The shovel was clean, too clean, as if it had been recently washed. The blade gleamed in the garage light, free of the dirt and plant matter that usually clings to it. Even the handle looked different, darker in spots, as if it had been gripped by wet hands. But I hadn't been gardening. I hadn't touched the shovel in weeks. Memory is a liar, I've come to understand. It edits and revises, fills in gaps with fiction, creates narratives that feel true but might be entirely fabricated. The night they asked about exists in my mind as a series of disconnected images, each one clear and vivid and possibly false. I remember being thirsty, my mouth dry as paper. I remember the taste of water, cold and sharp, washing away the metallic flavor that coated my tongue. But I also remember not getting up, not moving from the bed, sleeping deeply until the knock on the door woke me. Both memories feel equally real, equally mine. The knock itself reverberates in my consciousness, urgent and official and somehow inevitable. I knew even before I opened the door that my life was about to change. The knowledge sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy and immovable. But how could I have known? What could I have possibly known? They showed me a photograph, black and white and grainy, taken by a security camera somewhere in the neighborhood. A figure walking along a sidewalk, face obscured by shadows and distance. The gait was familiar, the way the shoulders moved, the length of the stride. But it could have been anyone. People walk. People move through the world at all hours for reasons of their own. The timestamp on the photograph meant nothing to me. Numbers on a screen, digital artifacts that could be manipulated or misread. Time itself felt fluid that night, elastic, stretching and contracting without regard for clocks or schedules. Minutes could have been hours, hours could have been minutes. The darkness played tricks with duration. I find myself drawn to the garden again and again, as if it holds answers I'm not ready to ask for. The depression in the earth seems deeper each time I look, more defined, more purposeful. The roses continue to wilt, their petals forming a carpet of decay that crunches underfoot. The sound is satisfying in a way that disturbs me. The fence at the back of the property needs repair. Several boards are loose, creating gaps wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I should fix them, but the task seems overwhelming, requiring energy and focus I don't possess. Instead, I stare at the gaps, wondering what might pass through them, what might use them as entrance or exit. Sleep, when it finally comes, brings dreams that feel more like memories. I'm standing in the garden, my bare feet cold on the wet grass. The roses are in full bloom, their scent cloying and too sweet. Someone is with me, a presence I can sense but not see. We're digging, our hands dark with soil, working together towards some shared purpose I can't quite grasp. I wake with dirt under my fingernails, though I clean them thoroughly before bed. The sheets are twisted around my legs like restraints, and my pajamas are damp with sweat or dew or something else I don't want to name. The taste in my mouth is stronger now, metallic and organic, as if I've been chewing on something that once lived in breath. The questions continue to echo in my head, a loop of inquiry that never quite resolves. Where was I that night? What did I see? What do I remember? The answers feel just out of reach, hidden behind a curtain of confusion and dread that I'm afraid to pull aside. The woman detective left her card on the table, a small rectangle of white that seems to glow in the dim light of my kitchen. Her name is printed in neat black letters, along with a phone number I'm supposed to call if I remember anything else. But memory is the problem, isn't it? Memory is the enemy, unreliable and treacherous, offering glimpses of truth wrapped in layers of uncertainty. I keep the curtains closed now, all of them, blocking out the garden and its accusations. But darkness inside feels no safer than the light outside. The house breathes around me, its walls expanding and contracting with secrets I may or may not possess. Every shadow could be hiding something, every silence could be pregnant with meaning. The metallic taste has become my constant companion, a reminder of something I can't quite place. It intensifies when I think about that night, about the questions, about the shape on the wall that wasn't mine. My tongue explores my mouth, searching for the source, but finds only the familiar landscape of teeth and tissue, nothing that should taste of metal and earth and regret. They'll be back, the detectives with their notebooks and kind, calculating eyes. They'll have more questions, more photographs, more pieces of a puzzle I'm not sure I want to see completed. And I'll sit at my table, feeling the dampness that's no longer there in my pant leg, tasting the metal that coats my thoughts, listening to the clock measure time I can't account for. The garden waits beyond the curtains, patient and knowing, its secrets buried in soil that seems richer and darker with each passing day. The roses continue their slow decay, marking time in fallen petals and withered stems. And somewhere in the space between memory and forgetting, between sleeping and waking, the truth lurks like a predator, waiting for the moment when I'm no longer strong enough to keep it at bay. The moisture in my shoes has long since dried, but my feet remember the cold wetness, the way the earth yielded beneath my weight. Or maybe they don't. Maybe I'm inventing sensations to fill the void where certainty should be. The line between what happened and what I think happened blurs more each day, until I can no longer distinguish between fact and fiction, between memory and dream, between innocence and something darker that I'm afraid to name. Story 10. The main corridor was illuminated by fluorescent lighting when I entered. Inventory in the refrigerated unit appeared meticulously organized, each item aligned precisely. The temperature gauge reflected an optimal setting, consistent with standard operating procedures. No alarms had been triggered, and logs indicated recent access during approved hours. The ventilation system maintained a steady hum, uninterrupted and regular. At the back of the unit, amidst neatly stacked supplies, a plastic-wrapped bundle lay out of sequence. It was unlabeled and cold to the touch. The inventory records listed no discrepancies. The unit's door had not been opened since my arrival. I've been staring at this report for weeks now, tracing the words with my finger until the ink seems to blur. The fluorescent lighting flickers above my desk in the same irregular pattern it always has, casting shadows that shift and dance across the pages. Sometimes I wonder if I wrote these words myself, or if they wrote themselves into existence while I slept. The facility where I work, where I've always worked, it seems operates on principles of precision. Everything must be cataloged, measured, verified. We handle specimens for research institutions, biological materials that require specific temperatures and handling protocols. The work is methodical, almost meditative. Each morning I check the units, record temperatures, verify inventory against shipping manifests. The routine never changes, yet somehow that particular morning felt different. I remember the sound my footsteps made on the polished floor, how they echoed differently than usual. The corridor seemed longer, stretched like a hallway in a dream where you can never quite reach the end. The fluorescent tubes hummed their familiar tune, but underneath that mechanical drone, I could swear I heard something else. Breathing, maybe, or the soft rustle of plastic wrapping. The bundle haunts me still. Not because of what it might have contained, but because of how perfectly it didn't belong. In a world of labels and protocols, of barcodes and chain of custody forms, here was something anonymous, something that existed outside our careful system of documentation. I lifted it with both hands, feeling its weight, its coldness seeping through the plastic into my palms. It was heavier than I expected, with an odd density that seemed to shift as I held it. I've replayed that moment countless times, examining it from every angle like a film reel stuck on loop. Each time I remember something new, some detail that escaped my notice before. The way the plastic crinkled when I touched it, the faint odor that seemed to emanate from within, not unpleasant exactly, but unfamiliar, clinical, preserved. My supervisor arrived shortly after I discovered it. I can picture her face as I described what I'd found, how her expression remained carefully neutral, professional. She listened to my account without interruption, nodding at appropriate intervals, her pen moving across her notepad in small, precise strokes. When I finished speaking, she asked me to show her the bundle. But when we returned to the refrigerated unit, it was gone. She made a note of this discrepancy, of course. Everything must be documented. I watched her write in that same measured handwriting I'd seen on countless forms and reports. The bundle's disappearance became another entry in our logbooks, another anomaly to be filed and forgot. She assured me that these things happen sometimes. Miscommunications between departments, paperwork that gets misfiled, simple explanations for complex problems. Yet I find myself returning to that morning again and again, walking through those same motions like an actor rehearsing a scene. I enter the corridor. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead. I approach the refrigerated unit, my hand reaching for the door handle. Inside, everything appears normal, organized, precise, but something is different now, something I can't quite name. The temperature readings remain consistent. The inventory logs show no discrepancies. The ventilation system maintains its steady hum, that mechanical heartbeat that marks the passage of time in our windowless facility. I've memorized these details, cataloged them with the same methodical care I apply to my daily work. But memory is unreliable, isn't it? Each time we recall an event, we change it slightly, adding new interpretations, subtracting inconvenient details. I've begun to wonder if the bundle was ever there at all. The security footage from that morning shows me entering the unit, moving through my routine inspections, checking temperatures and recording data. The cameras capture everything in grainy black and white, transforming our sterile workplace into something that resembles old film noir. I appear calm, methodical, following established protocols. At no point do the cameras show me discovering anything unusual. At no point do they show me lifting a mysterious bundle or examining its contents. But I remember the weight of it in my hands, the coldness that seeped through the plastic, the way it seemed to resist my touch, as if reluctant to be moved from its hiding place among the other specimens. My colleagues have been kind about my confusion. They speak to me in gentle tones, the way one might address someone recovering from an illness. They suggest I take some time off, get some rest, let my mind settle. The stress of our work can be overwhelming sometimes, they explain. The constant exposure to biological materials, the pressure of maintaining perfect records, the isolation of our underground facility, all of these factors can play tricks on the mind. I nod and smile and agree that rest might be beneficial, but at night when I close my eyes, I see that corridor again. The fluorescent lights casting their harsh shadows, the refrigerated unit humming in the background, and there among the neatly stacked supplies, something that doesn't belong, something that exists outside our careful system of labels and protocols. The plastic wrapping catches the light in a particular way, creating patterns that seem almost deliberate, almost like a message written in a language I don't understand. I reach for it with trembling hands, feeling its weight, its density, its wrongness. and then I wake up, my heart racing, my palms damp with perspiration. The facility operates on a schedule that never varies. We arrive before dawn when the corridors are empty and silent. We check our equipment, review our assignments, prepare for another day of methodical documentation. The work is important, they tell us. The specimens we handle contribute to vital research, medical breakthroughs that could save countless lives. We are guardians of scientific progress, custodians of knowledge. But knowledge can be a burden, can't it? Sometimes I think it would be easier to forget what I saw that morning, to accept the simple explanations offered by my supervisors. Miscommunication, misfiled paperwork, a tired mind playing tricks on itself. Instead, I find myself studying the other bundles in our inventory, searching for patterns or inconsistencies. I examine the labels with magnifying glasses, looking for signs of tampering or alteration. I cross-reference shipping manifests with delivery schedules, searching for gaps in our documentation. My colleagues watch me with growing concern, whispering among themselves when they think I can't hear. The bundle appears in my dreams with increasing frequency now. Sometimes it's exactly as I remember it, anonymous, unlabeled, cold to the touch. Other times it's different, wrapped in different materials, stored in different locations. Occasionally it speaks to me in voices I almost recognize, telling me things I immediately forget upon waking. I've started keeping a journal, recording these dreams with the same methodical care I apply to my work. Each entry is dated and timed, cross-referenced with my sleep patterns and daily activities. I'm searching for connections, patterns that might explain the persistent nature of these visions. But the more I write, the less certain I become about what actually happened that morning. Did I really find something unusual in the refrigerated unit? Or did my mind, stressed by months of repetitive work and artificial lighting, create an elaborate fiction to break the monotony of my routine? The security footage suggests the latter, but I can't shake the memory of that weight in my hands, that coldness seeping through plastic into my palms. My supervisor has been particularly attentive lately, checking on my work more frequently than usual. She speaks to me in measured tones, asking about my sleep patterns, my stress levels, my general well-being. Her concern feels genuine, but there's something else in her eyes when she looks at me, something that resembles caution or perhaps fear. Yesterday, she suggested I might benefit from a transfer to a different department. Something with more natural light, she said, more human interaction, less exposure to the biological materials that might be affecting my mental state. The offer was presented as an opportunity for growth, a chance to expand my skill set and take on new challenges. But I know what it really is. They want to remove me from the facility, to separate me from whatever truth I might have stumbled upon that morning. The bundle may be gone, but its absence speaks volumes about the nature of our work here, about the things we handle that never appear in our official logs, about the specimens that exist outside our careful system of documentation. I declined the transfer, of course, politely but firmly. I explained that I enjoy my current position, that I find satisfaction in the methodical nature of the work. My supervisor nodded and made another note in her ever-present notepad. I suspect this conversation will be documented as well, filed away with all the other anomalies and discrepancies that accumulate in a place like this. The fluorescent lights continue to flicker overhead as I work, casting their irregular shadows across the polished floors. The refrigerated units hum their mechanical lullabies, maintaining their precise temperatures with unwavering dedication. Everything appears normal, organized, exactly as it should be. But I know better now. I understand that normalcy is a carefully constructed illusion. maintained through protocols and procedures and the willful blindness of those who prefer not to see. The bundle may be gone, but others will take its place. Anonymous packages that arrive without documentation, specimens that exist outside our official inventory, mysteries wrapped in plastic and stored among the legitimate materials we handle. Sometimes late at night when the facility is empty except for security guards and automated systems, I walk through the corridors and listen to the sounds the building makes. The ventilation system breathing through its metal lungs, the refrigerated units cycling on and off in predetermined patterns, the fluorescent lights humming their electric songs. And sometimes, if I listen carefully enough, I can hear something else. The soft rustle of plastic wrapping, the whisper of secrets being moved from one location to another, the gentle thud of unlabeled bundles being placed among legitimate inventory, waiting to be discovered by someone whose curiosity outweighs their caution. I've become that someone, haven't I? The person who notices discrepancies, who asks uncomfortable questions, who remembers things that others prefer to forget. The bundle chose me as much as I discovered it, drawing my attention to the gaps in our otherwise perfect system. The main corridor stretches before me now as I prepare to leave for the evening, illuminated by the same fluorescent lighting that greeted me that first morning. The inventory in the refrigerated units remains meticulously organized, each item aligned precisely according to our protocols. Temperature gauges reflect optimal settings, consistent with standard operating procedures. But I know what I felt that morning. The weight of something that didn't belong, the coldness that seeped through plastic into my waiting palms. The bundle may be gone, erased from our logs and our security footage, but its impression remains, a ghost in our machine of precision and documentation. I reach for the door handle of the nearest refrigerated unit, my hand trembling slightly with anticipation. Inside, everything appears normal, organized, precise. But there, at the back of the unit, amidst neatly stacked supplies, something catches my eye, something that doesn't quite belong. It's unlabeled and cold to the touch,